Welcome to the Empowerment Zone. Our guest is Debra Kaye, a woman who truly has a global point of view. She had an extensive career in Europe. She was the former CEO of TBWA Italy, and she is the founder of New York-based Lecule, which is a innovation consultancy, which at some point during this interview, I'm going to ask her to talk about. But we have her on today because she's got a fascinating premise, something she refers to as the five red threads. And I want her to explain what that is. Listeners, you are in for a treat. Deborah is an expert in brand strategy and innovation. She's done extensive brand consulting for such companies as Colgate, McDonald's, Mars, and American Express. That's just to name a few of them. Deborah, you've identified five red threads which can help business leaders and entrepreneurs find success. Can you give our listeners a general idea of what you mean by the five red threads?
Basically, the five red threads are the connections you make in your brain to have ideas. The hardest thing you have to do is kind of when you have to develop your business is where do ideas come from? And so, I kind of get sweaty palms when I have to come up with ideas. And so basically, the five red threads help you know where to look for ideas. So I had never found a book that told me where to look for ideas, and that's what the five red threads are, so that you never have to have sweaty palms again, and there really are facts and observations and things that you can do to put ideas into your head.
Well, let's talk about the first thread, red thread number one, which you've identified as insight, and as you say, is no accident. But how can that be used to fire up the brain, as it were?
Well, let's talk about what is an insight. An insight is a compelling and refreshing, it's a compelling and refreshingly new realization. So it's something that no one's ever thought of before. But it has to be sufficiently strong that it propels you, the thinker or innovator, to act differently. So it has to be really provocative to propel you into action. Because once you have an insight, that's just the start of an idea. And there's a lot of hard work that you have to do after. So I think what's important about that red thread is that you have to understand that once this idea pops into your head, you have to learn to think of all the different possibilities of it. So red thread number one teaches you how do I expand my mind once I have this little idea to think of all the different possibilities, to question of all where it can go and how I can develop it further.
All right. That sometimes I think can be a challenge in and of itself, can't it?
Yes, because what we tend to do is think of the negatives and the obstacles before we think of the positives. My favorite and my favorite expression of that is if a burr falls on our sweater, the first thing we tend to do is we pull that burr off our sweater and we look at our sweater has a little knot in it and we say, ugh, this burr, and we throw it on the floor. And so what red thread number one teaches you to do is pull that little thing off your sweater, look at it and say, a burr. Look at this burr. How did this burr stick to my sweater? And if you question that burr, you might, in the right way, you might just be the next inventor of Velcro.
I
So
like
that's
that.
what red thread teaches you to do.
Well, here's a question that I had about red thread number two. It's easy, I think, for people to look back on their triumphs and kind of forget their failures. But you say with red thread number two, it means we will benefit by taking a fresh look at the past. What role would that play in innovative thinking going back to the past?
Well, the fact of the matter is there is really no such thing as an original idea. Most original ideas aren't completely original. Every innovation sits on the shoulders of another idea that came before it. Red thread number two shows that there's plenty of information, products, materials, technology that can be looked at in a fresh way, that can be somehow modified, that can be somehow used again. Sometimes the links between one idea and another are obvious. Sometimes the connection is more obscure, but that doesn't matter. The point is that innovation doesn't require a reinventing of the wheel every time, something that scares us away. I love to use the example of the Gutenberg press, which forever changed the world of communication. It was actually based on ancient Chinese movable type that was invented 500 years before Gutenberg was born. It was also based on the wine press from the vintners of Rhineland, which is where he happened to live, and then his own experience being a metallurgist. So there wasn't one original idea in it. And that's why people get scared about trying to think of new ideas. They think they have to come up with something completely new instead of tinkering with what they already know. And that's what the book is all about. You already have the knowledge in your head. It just shows you how to put it together and think in a positive way.
Well, it kind of sounds like when you're talking about looking back at the past with Red Thread number two and the example you just gave, it's kind of synonymous with a liberal arts education in a way, isn't it?
Well, liberal arts or science or biology or whatever you know, or just observing. I mean, uh, some of the greatest products in the world came from just observing. Febreze, which is the number one air freshener now in the world, came because they observed that instead of telling people their house smelled bad, they observed that when at the end of the cleaning process, the women happened to smooth their bedspread. They happened to put a pillow up. That was a little reward that women did to say the cleaning was done. So instead of just saying your house smells bad, they said, as part of that little reward at the end, make your house smell, give a little smell of a nice fresh scent. And so that changed forever the air freshening market.
So
And
oh, go ahead.
go ahead, and created one of the biggest brands.
Well, it just seems to me the more we talk about this, it's almost like you're having people be open to a paradigm shift in the way that they're used to thinking. And I know that if you think, you say the word innovation, and that is almost part and parcel with it, but you're really saying it's more fundamental than that. It's starting with how you think, even before you change the way you think.
it's it's it, it's very interesting that you say that. It's fundamental in changing your viewpoint in terms of being open, yes, but it's not fundamental in changing people's habits. People's habits are deeply ingrained. So if you're a very smart entrepreneur, what you look at is what are those deep habits and how do I make my business or my new invention fit well within those habits?
That sounds like you're kind of alluding to what you have as the red thread number three, which is talking about gaining an understanding of the culture in order to get your great ideas to market.
Absolutely. Culture is the belief and values expressed in behavior in social institutions. So, an example is the American culture of childhood, for example, finds its expressions in organization of education for children or how we talk and express affection to children and a host of formal practices. So, what red thread number three shows is how we look at these underlying reasons for habits. We do things and we have no idea what we do them, why we do them. But there are underlying reasons for that. So we all serve turkey in America at Thanksgiving.
Hmm.
It's just a habit. We all serve stuffing at Thanksgiving. You know, we all serve stuffing at holidays. Stuffing manufacturers have tried to get Americans to serve stuffing during the week. It's never going to work for all the advertising in the world. It took billions and billions of dollars to try and change people in the United States to stop smoking. It didn't work for all the money that people poured into it. It didn't actually stop people smoking until we changed access. And what I mean by that, we stopped them from smoking in restaurants. We stopped them from smoking in offices. That was the only way. So what you have to look at is what are the underlying behaviors and the reasons for that, and therefore then I can really create great products. And the master of that is Apple. So Apple, when they wanted to produce an MP3 player, could have just done a more beautiful MP3 player.
Hmm.
right? Because they do beautiful design work. But
Right.
what they understood was that people didn't want a better MP3 player with bells and whistles. With what they understood was that people wanted music. So what they did is rather than creating another MP3 player, they reduced steps and created iTunes so that people could get to music much faster, much easier, without any complication. And now Apple owns 90% of the delivery of all music in the United States.
You know, when I think about red thread number three and some of the things you were just saying, I was reminded of the old joke, very old, where a husband asks the wife, why do you cut off the ends of the ham when you put it in the pot with the pan to bake it? And the wife goes, I don't know. My mother always did it. He goes, well, why did she,
Exactly.
it's like, well, why did she do it? I don't know. I'll call her. And she calls the mother, and the mother says, well, because my mother always did it. And they finally get a hold of grandma, and it's like, why did you do this? And she says, well, because we didn't have a pan big enough for the ham, so we cut off the ends. You know, that's what I'm thinking of. Is like if you just ask the question, that can open up, do the why, and that can open up a myriad of possibilities. That's really what you're saying.
Exactly. And, to that point, right, everybody says, I want to build a better mousetrap, right?
Hmm.
And so everybody tries to build a better mousetrap. But if you ask the question differently and say, well, rather than building a better mousetrap, how do I keep mice out of the house in the first place,
Yes.
right? You could create a better invention.
Wow. This is so good. This is just really good stuff. Okay, on the surface, red thread number four appears to be a take on the KISS theory, the keep it simple, stupid.
Hmm.
But what do you mean when you say simple is sticky? One. And two, can you talk a little bit about your simple advantage plus smart language plus storytelling icons equal sizzling sales equation?
Well, basically, one picture is worth 1,000 words. So you need to, first of all, you need to communicate your new idea in a way that gives it an immediate point of difference to consumers. And this is the hardest thing sometimes for people to understand. If you create a new ingredient for a product and you stick it in the same kind of box that everybody else has, and it looks the same as everybody else, it's going to be very difficult for your consumer to know that that's something new and different. If it acts like a duck and quacks like a duck, package it like a duck and not like the chickens that everybody else has.
Okay.
So, we believe that, iconography, is really the perfect reduction of information to a sign that can be easily communicated. The Olympics is proof of this. If you look at the icons at the Olympics, they have managed to communicate, everything from toilets to food to every kind of sport imaginable in a very simple icon that nations all over the world can understand.
Hmm.
And we believe, especially now that we live in the small screens of of our iPhones, and the world is that really it's much more emotional and much quicker. People spend 3 seconds at the shelf to communicate this way in words. And if you think about it, the very famous campaign was I Heart New York. Well, if they had written out the words love, I love New York, it's much less emotional and it communicates much less than seeing that heart there. So we really believe that if you can figure out a way to communicate in pictures, and what I do with kids who start with us, everybody gets up and they say, I am so and they talk about their life a little bit. And what I ask them to do is to draw that out in pictures.
Oh.
And that little 5-minute exercise of drawing your life out in pictures and communicate it just creates a totally new experience for themselves and for the people in the audience. And it's a very different way of communicating, and it just draws on the emotional heartstrings in a very different way. So we just believe that that's the way to communicate in the future.
Excellent. Well, if people would like to know more about your book, they can go to redthreadthinking.com. They can go on our website, which we will have a link when the story is posted on you. And I just want to say, that I'm in agreement with those who have said never before has a book so clearly demystified what it takes to innovate.